All right, go ahead.
All right, so this is our case study presentation. I'm Chris,
I'm Andrew.
and for our table of contents, we're going to do the business problem, followed by the research question 1, 2, and 3, with our analysis and our interpretation. So the business problem, Scott and Chelsea Winery are considering the production of a second wine, but they want to make sure it is the right wine. The right wine is going to be the one that has the greatest potential of receiving a score of at least 80 points on the Wine Enthusiast website, and one that has a steady or increasing trend in consumer demand. So research question 1 is, which category of wine has the highest average points? And we found that red blend and red wine rate the highest, while rosé ranks the lowest of the 5 categories. Red wine had 89.18 for the average points, followed by red blend, which was 89.91, followed by rosé, which was 87.52, followed by white, which was 88.41, and last but not least, white blend, which was 87.89. It is also important to note that the count of each individual category, and Scott wants to know which wine has the greatest potential to score at least an 80. Our analysis shows us that almost half of the wines on record in the Washington area are red wines. All right, next slide.
Do you see it?
So, yeah. So red blend wine and red wine are the 2 categories with the highest score. In our opinion, while looking at average points of each wine category, it is also important to consider how many records there are for each category. The stat we found that nearly half of the records in the Washington area are red wines is very interesting. It should be brought into a consideration that the reviewers might be biased towards red wine, leading to a greater potential for new red wine developed by Chelsea Winery to find itself on the Wine Enthusiast website. So for number 2, it's considering white, white blend, red, red blend, and rosé, which wine category has the highest average price. So the highest average price for the categories was the red blend with $40.83, followed by this red wine, which was $36.81. And then it followed by the white and white blend, which are about $24 and $20. And then lastly, it was the rosé, which is the least expensive with an average price of $19. So the red blend wine has 84 outliers that affect the mean, which is like 1203 total red blend. When we remove the outliers, all records above are $83. We find that the average price drops to $38.27. The difference is more than $2. The mean without the outliers removed was $40.83. So the data tells us that the red blend wine and red wine are far more expensive than any other categories. So this means that Scott and Chelsea Winery would be able to charge more for the red or red blend than if they were to make white, white blend, or rosé.
All right. So for research question 3, we were asked, do wines with notes of fruit rate higher in average points and in average price compared to wines without notes of fruit? So for the analysis, so first we're looking at price. We decided it was a two-tailed test with a null hypothesis. We said that for the records in the Washington area, there's no difference in price between the wines with notes of fruit and wines that don't have notes of fruit. And the alternative, what we want to prove, or what Scott wants to prove, is for records in the Washington area that there is a difference in price between wines with notes of fruit and wines that do not have notes of fruit. So we signed alpha at 0.05 because we felt like Scott wanted to be fairly certain that this was in fact a good sample. And we found that the p-value is 0.1, meaning that the p-value is not significant and that we should fail to reject the null hypothesis and that there's no difference in price between wines with notes of fruit and wines that do not have notes of fruit. We can see though that the wines with notes of fruit, the sample mean is $32.53, and the wines without notes of fruit, the sample mean is $31.13. But obviously, with the p-value not being significant, we can't take that for certain. In the analysis for points, we also said it was a two-tailed test. For null, we said that the records in the Washington area, there is no difference in points between wines with notes of fruit and wines that do not have notes of fruit. For the alternative, what Scott wants to prove, for records in the Washington area, there's a difference in points between wines with notes and fruits and wines that don't have notes of fruits. So again, we assigned alpha at 0.05 because we felt like Scott wanted to be pretty certain about the sample. And we found that the p-value is actually less than 0.00, meaning that the p-value is very significant. And this leads us to reject the null hypothesis that there is no difference in points between wines with notes of fruit and wines that do not have notes of fruit. So right here, we can look at the wines with notes of fruit, the fruity points, sample mean at 89.03, and then the non-fruity points at 87.97. That's more than a point difference between the wines with notes of fruit and wines that don't have notes of fruit. So that's interesting to look at. So for the interpretation for this, the t-test we ran to determine the significance of the p-value for price proves that there's not a real difference in price based on the characteristics of the wine, meaning that there's not really a difference between in price depending on if it has notes of fruit or if it doesn't. However, the t-test we ran to determine the significance of the p-value for points proves that there is a difference in points based on the characteristics of the wine. This tells us that the wines with fruity notes do actually rate higher than wines without the fruity notes in them. So now we're going to take a look at the recommendations based on the data. We said that Scott should definitely consider producing a red blend wine over any other type of wine. However, in addition, we did include red wine as another choice, but we definitely lean towards red blend. But we offer both suggestions based on Scott wants to do and kind of how he wants to go about it. So here are kind of the pros for both red and red blend. So for red blend, the red blend wine has the highest average points. It has the highest average price. That means that Scott could charge a higher price for red blend than any of the others. And there aren't as many red blends in the Washington area that are on the Wine Enthusiast website. So this means that it could be easier to stand out if Scott were to make a good red blend wine. So for the red wine, it has the second highest average points. It has the second highest average price. And again, that means that Scott could charge a higher price for red than most of the others. I think red blend, the average price was about 40, and for red, the average price was about 36, and that was far above any of the others. And then going back to the red wine, there are far more red wines on the Wine Enthusiast website than any other type of wine. So this has us thinking that the reviewers might be biased towards the red wine and including it on the website. So going into the fruity notes, we also suggest that Scott should definitely make the wine so that it does have fruity notes in it. If he's going with red or red blend, either way, they both should contain the fruity notes. Because not only do we prove that there is a difference in points between the wines with fruity notes and the ones without them, we also found that most of the red wine and the red blend wines do have the fruity notes in them. If you look at the chart on the left, it says that the red wines have 93.8% of those wines do have fruity notes in them, and of the red blends, 94.4% of those wines have fruity notes in them. And then we also found that that the red wines and the red blend wines that do have the fruity notes in them do have a little bit of a higher score than the red wines and the red blend wines that do not. If you look at the average red with the fruit, it's at almost 89, 88.95, and then average red without the fruit is 88.92. Not a huge difference, but definitely there. And then the average red blend with fruit is 89.02, and the average red blend without fruit is 88.98. Again, not a huge difference, but there's something there. So lastly, the next steps for the research that Scott needs to do before he goes forward with the production of a new wine. He needs to predict the expenses and what the market might look like. Some expenses that should be thought about is, does he need to buy any new machinery to produce the new wine? Does he need to buy grapes, etc.? Anything else he might need to pay for to be able to make this new wine? And then he needs to predict the market. We need to look at what the desire and the need for this product is. If it's going to be really good, if it's going to be okay, if it's going to be bad. And then Scott should also think about how much he can sell the new wine for. And here's just a couple extra charts. But with that, we are Andrew and Chris, and this is our presentation. All right, how do I